The hands moved with surgical precision. Stamp. Sort. File. Stamp. Sort. File. Staff Sergeant Colette Odia had processed 11 classified documents in the past 4 minutes without a single wasted motion. Her breathing was measured. Her posture was still. If anyone had bothered to watch her work, they might have noticed something unsettling about the way she operated. The economy of movement. The preternatural calm. The eyes that tracked every person entering the G2 intelligence section without her head ever turning. But nobody watched Staff Sergeant Odia. She had spent 3 years making certain of that. Fort Huachuca spread across the Arizona desert like a forgotten outpost, home to the Army Intelligence Center and several thousand soldiers who would never see combat. The administrative building where Colette worked hummed with fluorescent lights and the quiet desperation of careers going nowhere. She preferred it that way. Before we continue with the story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have known someone whose true abilities remain completely hidden from everyone around them. The door to the section swung open, and Chief Warrant Officer Desmond Cray strode in with the confidence of a man who believed his rank made him interesting. He stopped at Colette's desk without acknowledging her existence, letting 3 seconds pass before he spoke. Odia, coffee, 2 sugars, and make sure it is actually hot this time. Yes, sir. She rose without expression and walked toward the break room. Behind her, she heard Cray speaking to another officer. That one is reliable at least. Good with details. Women usually are. Something about their brains being wired for the mundane. The other officer laughed. Colette poured the coffee, added 2 sugars, tested the temperature against her wrist, returned to Cray's desk, and set it down with perfect placement. Dismissed, he said without looking up. She returned to her documents. Stamp. Sort. File. The morning crept forward. At 1100 hours, a young private appeared at her desk looking like he might cry. Private First Class Tomas Delgadillo was 19 years old with nervous eyes and hands that could not stay still. He had been at Fort Huachuca for 6 weeks and still looked lost. Staff Sergeant, I need help. My grandmother is dying, and I submitted the hardship leave paperwork, but personnel says it is missing signatures, and I do not know which ones, and the flights to El Paso are getting more expensive every day, and I just... He stopped, swallowed, tried to compose himself. Colette studied him for a moment. Show me the forms. He handed over a crumpled mess of documents. She spread them across her desk, scanning each page with mechanical efficiency. Her fingers stopped on the 3rd form. You need the S1 signature here. And your company commander missed the block on page 2. I can walk this through personnel myself if you give me until 1400. Delgadillo stared at her. You would do that? It was not a question. It was disbelief. Your grandmother is dying, Private. Paperwork should not be the reason you miss saying goodbye. Something shifted in his expression, like he was seeing her for the first time. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. Really, go back to your duty station. I will find you when it is processed. He left. Colette gathered his forms and began making notes on which offices she would need to visit. Across the room, Cray's voice carried. Odia, when you are done playing social worker, I need the SIGINT reports collated by close of business. All of them? Yes, sir. Lunch came at 12:30. Colette walked to the dining facility alone, as always, but found a familiar face waiting at their usual table. Sergeant First Class Amara Ibequi had transferred to Fort Huachuca from Fort Gordon 2 years ago, and she was one of perhaps 3 people on the installation who knew Colette's name without checking a roster. You look tired, Amara said as Colette sat down. I am fine. You always say that. Amara pushed a bread roll across the table. Eat something. You're getting thin. Colette took the roll. Amara had been a police detective in Lagos before immigrating to the United States. She noticed things. It was what made their friendship both valuable and dangerous. Something strange happened yesterday, Amara said, lowering her voice. I was running access reports for the S1, and I pulled Cray's file by accident. He has been accessing classified materials outside his need to know. 3 times this month. Colette's chewing slowed almost imperceptibly. That is not your concern. Someone selling secrets is everyone's concern. You do not know that is what he is doing. I know that pattern, Amaris said. I investigated corruption for 6 years in Lagos. When people access what they should not access, they're either stealing or they're hiding something. Often both. Colette set down her fork. Leave it alone, Amara. Men like Cray have protection. You start digging, you become a problem. Amara studied her friend with those detective eyes. You notice things, Colette. You always have. But you pretend you do not. Why is that? It was not a question Colette intended to answer. That evening, she returned to her quarters as the desert sun painted the mountains gold. The room was sparse. Regulation bed. Regulation desk. No photographs. No declarations. Nothing personal except a single locked case beneath her bed that she had not opened in 3 years. She changed out of her uniform, performed her evening routine, sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at them, willed them to stop. They did not obey. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter passed over the base. The sound triggered something, a flash of rooftops, dust in her mouth, the weight of a rifle she had sworn never to touch again. Colette closed her eyes, breathed, counted to 10. When she opened them, her hands were still. She reached beneath the bed. Her fingers found the case. She pulled it out, set it on the mattress, and stared at the lock she had not turned since the day she arrived at Fort Huachuca. 3 years of silence. 3 years of paperwork and coffee runs and being invisible. She did not open the case. But for the first time in 1,000 days, she wanted to. The morning physical training formation assembled at 05:30 when the desert was still cold enough to see breath. Colette fell in with the administrative personnel, stretching her legs with the mechanical disinterest of someone who found the whole exercise tedious. Around her, soldiers groaned and complained about the early hour. She said nothing. The run was 3 miles. She finished in the middle of the pack, exactly where she always finished. Not fast enough to draw attention. Not slow enough to warrant concern. Perfectly, deliberately average. What no one noticed was that her breathing never changed. Not at mile 1. Not at mile 2. Not when the soldier beside her was gasping for air at the finish line. Colette's heart rate had barely elevated. She had trained her body to perform at 20% capacity and make it look like 80. Invisibility required commitment. After formation, she showered and dressed and walked to the G2 building as the sun crested the Huachuca Mountains. The light caught the peaks in a way that stopped her mid-stride. For a moment, she was not in Arizona. She was on a rooftop in Mogadishu, the African sun blazing overhead, the weight of her rifle pressed against her shoulder. She was watching a compound through her scope. She was counting heartbeats. She was watching a child soldier step into her crosshairs with an AK-47 pointed at Marcus. She blinked. Arizona. Fort Huachuca. Administrative duty. She kept walking. The operations center was buzzing when she arrived. Something had happened overnight, some intelligence development that had the officers speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Colette filed into the G2 section and began her morning routine. Stamp. Sort. File. Chief Warrant Officer Cray appeared at 0800 with a stack of folders and an expression of barely concealed irritation. He dropped the folders on her desk with unnecessary force. These were supposed to be indexed yesterday. Oh, do ya? I found them sitting on my desk this morning with no organization whatsoever. Colette looked at the folders. She recognized them. She had indexed them perfectly and placed them in Cray's inbox in alphabetical order by classification level. Someone had shuffled them afterward. Sir, I completed that task at 16:30 yesterday. The indexing was. Are you arguing with me, Staff Sergeant? It was not a question. It was a warning. No, sir. Then fix it. And next time, do your job correctly the first time. He turned and walked toward a cluster of officers near the situation maps. One of them made a comment Colette could not hear. Cray laughed and glanced back at her desk. Master Sergeant Dwayne Kinney passed her station on his way to the coffee pot. He was the senior enlisted soldier in the operations center, a thick-necked infantryman who had somehow ended up pushing papers in his twilight years. He looked at Colette the way he always looked at her, like she was furniture. Do not take it personal, he said without stopping. Cray treats everyone like that. Well, Everyone without combat patches. The implication was clear. Colette had no combat patch on her uniform. No deployment revens. Nothing to indicate she had ever done anything beyond shuffle papers in air-conditioned buildings. The records said she had spent her entire career in administrative positions at stateside installations. The records said a lot of things. Colette re-indexed the folders, placed them in Cray's inbox, returned to her station. At noon, Private Delgadillo appeared at her desk with red-rimmed eyes and a smile that threatened to break into tears. Staff Sergeant, the leave got approved. I'm flying out tonight. My grandmother, she is still holding on. I'm going to make it. Good. I just wanted to say thank you. Nobody else would have helped me. Nobody else even knows my name around here. Colette looked at him, 19 years old, eager, terrified of failing, desperate to matter. Your name is Tomas Delgadillo, she said. You are from El Paso. You enlisted because your family could not afford college and you wanted to make them proud. You worked the night shift in the operations center because you volunteered for it, thinking it would get you noticed. It has not. His mouth opened, closed. People notice you, Private. They simply do not say so. Go see your grandmother. Tell her about your service. Make her proud while you still can. He nodded, swallowed, walked away with his shoulders slightly higher than before. The afternoon passed in administrative silence. At 1700, Colette secured her workstation and walked to the dining facility. Amara was waiting. You look worse than yesterday, Amara said. Did you sleep? Enough. That is not an answer. Colette picked at her food. Amara leaned forward, her voice dropping. I did more digging. Cray's access logs show he has been pulling files on signals intelligence assets. Specific ones. The kind that would be very valuable to certain foreign parties. Amara, I'm not being paranoid. I was a detective, Colette. I know when something is wrong. And something is very wrong with that man. Colette set down her fork. Even if you were right, what do you expect to do about it? Report him. To whom? He has friends in high places. You are a sergeant first class with an accent. Who do you think they will believe? Amara's jaw tightened. So we do nothing. We stay out of it. We let people with authority handle it. What they do not. Colette had no answer for that. She finished her meal in silence and returned to her quarters as darkness fell over the desert. The base announcement system crackled to life at 1900. Attention all personnel. Routine communications maintenance will be conducted tonight between 0200 and 0600. Expect intermittent outages. This is a scheduled maintenance window. No action required. Colette stood at her window, watching the last light fade from the mountains. Routine maintenance. Scheduled window. No action required. Her hands began to shake again. She looked at the case beneath her bed, looked at her trembling fingers, looked back at the mountains where the shadows were growing long and deep. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the air. The same instinct that had kept her alive in places that did not exist on any official map. The same awareness that had made her the best at what she did, what she used to do. She sat on her bed, closed her eyes, practiced the breathing exercises that had once steadied her aim across impossible distances. In, hold, out, hold. Her hands stopped shaking, but the feeling did not go away. Outside, the desert night settled over Fort Huachuca like a hell breath. And somewhere in the darkness, 8 men were making final preparations for an operation that would change everything. Sleep would not come. Colette lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each breath the way she had been trained to count between heartbeats. The feeling had not left her. That prickling awareness at the base of her skull that something was wrong. At 0100, she gave up. She dressed in her physical training uniform and slipped out of her quarters into the desert night. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of creosote and distant rain. She began walking the base perimeter, a habit she had developed years ago in places where walking at night could get you killed. Fort Huachuca was quiet. The administrative buildings stood dark. The motor pool was empty. The operations center glowed with the pale light of overnight duty officers' monitoring screens that rarely showed anything interesting. She passed the main gate and nodded to the military police officer on duty. Just getting some air, she said. could not sleep. He waved her through without interest. Staff sergeants walking at night were not his concern. She continued along the fence line, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. The Huachuca Mountains loomed to the east, black shapes against the sky filled with stars. She knew those mountains, had studied their contours on topographical maps during her first week here. Old habits. Something caught her attention near the motor pool. A maintenance truck she did not recognize. White, unmarked, parked at an angle that blocked the security camera's view of the eastern access road. She stopped, studied the truck, studied the camera angle, studied the shadows around the vehicle. Paranoia, she told herself. You're not that person anymore. This is Arizona. This is an administrative installation. Nothing happens here. She kept walking. Near the communications building, she noticed something else. The security cameras on the eastern side had been adjusted. Subtle changes. A degree or two of rotation that created blind spots where there should not be blind spots. She stopped again. The night shift technicians had probably bumped them during routine maintenance. It happened. Cameras got moved. Angles got shifted. It meant nothing. She turned back toward her quarters. Forced herself to breathe normally. Forced herself to stop looking for threats that did not exist. But she walked faster than before. Inside the operations center, Private Delgadillo was monitoring the night shift communications board with the earnest attention of a soldier who wanted to prove himself. His flight to El Paso had been delayed by weather, pushing his departure to tomorrow morning. He had volunteered to cover the overnight shift rather than sit in his quarters waiting. The screens showed normal activity, routine traffic, nothing unusual. At 01:45, the communications console flickered. Delgadillo frowned. Tapped the screen. The flicker stopped. Master Sergeant Kenny looked up from his desk. Problem, Private. No, Master Sergeant. Just a glitch. Probably related to the scheduled maintenance. Kenny grunted and returned to his paperwork. Delgadillo watched the screen. The flicker did not return, but something felt different. A subtle change in the background hum of the equipment. A frequency that had shifted almost imperceptibly. He was about to say something when the door to the operations center opened. Chief Warrant Officer Cray walked in, which was unusual. Cray never worked night shifts. Cray barely worked day shifts. Sir, Delgadillo said, straightening in his seat. I was not expecting you tonight. Cray did not look at him. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He walked past the duty stations toward his office in the back of the building. Kenny watched him go. The hell is he doing here at 2 in the morning? No one answered. Colette reached her quarters at 0200. She stood at her window, looking out at the dark base. The operations center was visible from here, a rectangle of light against the black desert. She saw Cray's vehicle parked outside, saw the lights in his office window. Why was he there at this hour? She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she was done noticing things. She told herself to go to bed and forget about cameras and trucks and warrant officers who kept strange hours. She was still telling herself these things when the power went out. The base plunged into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in 3 seconds later, restoring partial lighting to critical buildings. The operations center, the hospital, the security stations. Colette's quarters remained dark. She stood frozen at her window, watching, waiting. The power had gone out exactly at 0200. Exactly when the scheduled maintenance was supposed to begin. Exactly on time. Too exactly. And then she heard it. Distant at first, but unmistakable. A sound she had heard in a dozen countries on 4 continents. A sound that had no place at a stateside army installation. Gunfire. Not training fire. Training fire had a rhythm. A cadence. This was different. This was the staccato burst of suppressed weapons engaging real targets. More shots. Closer now. Coming from the direction of the security station near the main gate. Colette's body moved before her mind could catch up. She was across the room in 2 steps. On her knees beside the bed. Her hands finding the locked case with the muscle memory of 1,000 repetitions. The key was around her neck. Had been around her neck for 3 years. She had never taken it off. Not once. She held the key in her trembling fingers. More gunfire. Screaming now. the sounds of chaos spreading across the base. She thought about Delgadillo in the operations center, about Amara in her quarters near the main gate, about all the soldiers who had no idea what was coming for them. She looked at the case. 3 years of silence. 3 years of pretending to be someone else. 3 years of running from the thing she was. The gunfire was getting closer. Her hands stopped shaking. She did not open the case. Not yet, but her fingers tightened around the key, and somewhere deep inside her, something that had been sleeping for a very long time began to wake. Colette released the key, let it fall back against her chest. She moved to the window and pressed herself against the wall, peering out at an angle that minimized her exposure. Figures moving in the darkness. She counted them automatically. 8. Moving in two-man teams with tactical precision. Night vision equipment. Suppressed weapons. Communication headsets. These are not terrorists or criminals. These were professionals. She tracked their formation. Standard special operations pattern. European training, probably Scandinavian based on their spacing. They were sweeping toward the operations center with the confidence of men who expected minimal resistance. They were right to expect it. Fort Huachuca was an intelligence installation, not a combat base. The security forces were minimal. The soldiers were analysts and administrators. Most of them had never fired a weapon outside of basic training qualification. 2 of the figures broke off toward the housing area. Colette watched them approach the building where Amara lived. Her jaw tightened. She could not save everyone. She could not even save herself if she stayed here waiting for them to conduct room-by-room clearance. But she could move. She could gather people. She could get them somewhere defensible. She left the case under her bed, slipped out of her quarters through the back window, dropped into the shadows between buildings with the silence of someone who had spent years learning to move without sound. 3 junior soldiers were huddled behind the laundry facility, terrified and confused. A specialist and 2 privates, none of them older than 22. They stared at Colette as she materialized from the darkness like a ghost. "Staff Sergeant, what is happening?" the specialist whispered. "We heard shooting, and then the power went out, and we did not know what to do. Follow me. Stay low. Do not speak." She led them through the base using routes that avoided the camera positions and sight lines. The soldiers stumbled behind her, loud and clumsy, but she kept them moving. She found a maintenance basement beneath the motor pool, secured the door, and positioned them in the corner. "Stay here. Do not open this door for anyone. If someone tries to force entry, there is a crawl space behind that panel. It leads to the drainage system. Follow it south until you reach the perimeter fence." The specialist stared at her. "How do you know all this?" Colette did not answer. She was already moving toward the door. "Where are you going?" one of the privates asked. "To find others." She slipped back into the night. The operations center was 200 meters away. She could see the lights still burning inside, the emergency generators keeping the critical systems running. She could also see 2 bodies on the ground near the entrance. Military police officers. Shot clean. She circled wide, approaching from the eastern side where the shadows were deepest. Through a window, she could see the interior. 5 soldiers on their knees with their hands behind their heads. Master Sergeant Kinney among them, blood running from a cut on his forehead. Private Delgadillo beside him, pale and shaking but alive. 6 armed men inside. The other 2 were still sweeping the base. A voice carried through the broken window. Accented English. Norwegian, maybe. Calm and professional. "Your communications are down. No one is coming for 4 hours minimum. We are leaving with what we came for. The only question is how many of you we leave breathing." Kinney spoke through gritted teeth. "What do you want?" "We want nothing from you, Master Sergeant. You are simply witnesses. And witnesses are problematic." Colette watched as one of the armed men moved to the back of the building. A moment later, he returned escorting Chief Warrant Officer Cray. But something was wrong with the picture. Cray was not being dragged or forced. He was walking normally, willingly. His hands were not bound. The Norwegian spoke again. "Chief Warrant Officer, your extraction vehicle will arrive in approximately 40 minutes. I suggest we relocate you to the landing zone." Cray nodded. "What about them?" The Norwegian looked at the hostages. That depends on how cooperative they remain. Colette felt her chest tighten. Cray was not a hostage. He was the objective. These men were here to extract him, and everyone who had seen him leave willingly was a liability. They were going to kill the witnesses. She pulled back from the window. Her mind was racing through options. 8 hostiles. 2 outside, 6 inside. She had no weapon, no communication, no backup. She could run, reach the perimeter, find help. By the time help arrived, everyone in that building would be dead. She thought about Delgadillo, 19 years old, going to see his dying grandmother, thanking her for helping with his paperwork. She thought about Amara. She had not seen her yet, did not know if she was alive or captured or hiding. She thought about the case under her bed, the rifle she had not touched in 3 years, the ghillie suit that still smelled faintly of African dust. You're not that person anymore, she told herself. You swore you would never be that person again, but that person was the only one who could save them. Colette moved through the shadows toward the housing area, toward Amara. She found her friend crouched behind a vehicle near the medical building, clutching her leg. Blood was seeping between her fingers. Amara looked up as Colette approached. Her eyes widened. Colette, thank God. I was trying to reach the operations center when they came through. One of them shot me before I could get to cover. Colette knelt beside her, examined the wound, through and through, missing the artery. Painful, but not fatal. Can you move? I can try. There is a maintenance basement beneath the motor pool. I have 3 soldiers there. Can you make it on your own? Amara grabbed her arm. Where are you going? Colette did not answer. Amara's grip tightened, her detective eyes searching Colette's face, finding something there that made her breath catch. Who are you? She whispered. Colette gently removed Amara's hand, pointed her toward the motor pool. Go, now. Stay hidden until this is over. She disappeared into the darkness before Amara could respond. The night air was cold against her skin as she ran toward her quarters, toward the case, toward the thing she had been running from for 3 years. Her hands were steady now, completely steady. Colette reached her quarters through the back window. The room was dark, silent. The sounds of chaos outside felt distant now, muffled by the walls and by the singular focus narrowing her mind to a single point. The case was where she had left it, beneath the bed, waiting. She knelt on the floor, pulled it out, set on the mattress. The lock was cold against her fingers as she inserted the key. 3 years, 1,096 days since she had last opened this case. She remembered the exact number because she had counted every single one. The lock clicked. The lid opened. Inside, nestled in foam cutouts that she had carved herself, lay the tools of her former life. A custom M110 semi-automatic sniper system with a modified stock fitted to her exact specifications. A Leopold Mark IV scope calibrated to her eye. A suppressor that reduced the sound signature by 42 decibels. 12 rounds of M118 long-range ammunition. And beneath it all, folded with military precision, a ghillie suit that still carried the faint smell of Mogadishu. She touched the rifle. The metal was cold, familiar, like shaking hands with a ghost. Marcus had given her this weapon, her spotter, her partner, the man who had watched her back through 17 missions across 9 countries. He had modified it himself, spending 3 months perfecting every component until it was an extension of her body rather than a separate tool. I am sorry, Marcus, she whispered. She lifted the rifle from the case, checked the action, verified the scope alignment, loaded the magazine with practiced efficiency. Her hands moved through the motions without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over after 3 years of dormancy. The ghillie suit came next. She stripped out of her physical training uniform and pulled on the mesh underlayer, then the outer covering with its desert-pattern fabric strips. The weight settled onto her shoulders like an old coat, like coming home. But there was nothing welcoming about this homecoming. She thought about the last time she had worn this suit. Mogadishu, the rooftop overlooking the compound. Marcus beside her, calling wind, speed, and distance. The target was a warlord responsible for 3 mass graves and the trafficking of over 200 children. The shot had been clean. The warlord fell. Mission accomplished. And then the child soldier had appeared. 12 years old, maybe 13, holding an AK-47 that was almost as big as he was, pointing it at Marcus from 15 meters away. Colette had seen the boy's finger tightening on the trigger, had seen the fear and the determination in his young eyes, had known with absolute certainty that if she did not act, Marcus would die. She had acted. The boy had fallen, and something inside Colette had fallen with him. Marcus never blamed her, never said a word about it. But 2 weeks later, he had eaten his service weapon in his quarters at their forward operating base. No note, no explanation, just the gunshot that had haunted her dreams ever since. She shook her head, forced the memories back into the box, where she kept them locked. There was no time for ghosts. There were living people who needed her. She moved to the window, scanned the terrain between her quarters and the mountains to the east. The Huachuca Range rose dark against the star-filled sky, offering elevation and concealment. She knew a position there, had scouted it during her first week on base, back when she still thought like a sniper. 800 meters, clear sight lines to the operations center, enough elevation to engage targets through the windows. It would take her 28 minutes to reach optimal overwatch if she moved carefully. She checked her watch. 02:47. If the extraction helicopter was arriving in 40 minutes, she had maybe 35 minutes before they started eliminating witnesses. 35 minutes to cover 800 meters of rough terrain, get into position, calculate wind and distance, and eliminate 8 professional operators before they could kill 5 innocent soldiers. 12 minutes. That was her window once she started shooting. The suppressor will buy her time, but not much. After the first shot, they would know she was there. After the second, they would start looking. After the third, they would have a general direction. By the fourth, they would be taking cover and returning fire. She needed 8 shots in 12 minutes. 8 perfect shots against moving, trained targets who would be actively trying to kill her. Impossible. She had faced worse. Colette slipped out of her quarters and disappeared into the desert night. Her movement was different now. The shuffling gait of an administrative specialist was gone, replaced by the fluid, predatory motion of someone who had spent a decade learning to become invisible. She crossed the open ground in bursts, using shadows and terrain features for concealment. The attackers were focused on the operations center and the housing sweep. None of them were watching the eastern perimeter. None of them expected a threat from the mountains. That was their first mistake. The terrain grew rough as she left the base behind. Rocks and scrub brushed toward her ghillie suit, but she barely noticed. Her breathing was controlled. Her heart rate was steady. Her mind was calculating angles and distances with every step. She thought about Delgadillo on his knees in the operations center, about the look on his face when she had told him people noticed him, about his grandmother waiting in El Paso for a grandson who might never arrive. She thought about Kenny, the man who had dismissed her as a paper pusher. He was bleeding and defiant in there, protecting his soldiers the only way he knew how. He had no idea that the quiet woman he ignored every day was the only thing standing between him and a bullet. She thought about Amara, limping toward the motor pool with a hole in her leg and questions in her eyes. "Who are you?" Amara had asked. Colette climbed higher into the mountains, the rifle a familiar weight across her back. She was about to show them all exactly who she was. The climb took 26 minutes. Colette found her position on a rocky outcropping 847 meters from the operations center, sheltered by a natural depression that concealed her profile against the mountain face. She had scouted this exact spot 3 years ago, noting the clear sight lines and the wind patterns that funneled through the valley below. She settled into the prone position with the ease of someone who had spent thousands of hours in this exact posture. The rifle nestled against her shoulder. The scope pressed her eye. The world narrowed to a circle of magnified light. The operations center filled her field of view. Through the windows, she could see the hostages still kneeling in a row. Kenny, Delgadillo, 3 other soldiers whose names she did not know, but whose faces she had memorized from countless mornings in the G2 section. They were alive. For now, she counted the hostiles. 2 guards visible outside the building. One near the main entrance, one patrolling the eastern side. Inside, she could identify 4 more moving between the windows. The remaining 2 were likely with Cray, preparing for extraction. 8 targets, 12 rounds. No margin for error. She began her calculations. Wind speed approximately 4 miles per hour from the southwest, based on the movement of the flag near the motor pool. Temperature had dropped to 41 degrees, which would affect bullet trajectory by a fraction of an inch at this distance. Elevation difference between her position and the targets was approximately 212 feet, requiring a slight adjustment to her holdover. Her fingers made micro-adjustments to the scope. Click, 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 each adjustment bringing her 0 closer to perfection. She checked her watch. 0319. The Norwegian had said the extraction helicopter would arrive in 40 minutes. That had been approximately 45 minutes ago. They were running behind schedule, which meant they would be getting nervous. Nervous men made mistakes, but nervous men also accelerated timelines. She needed to move soon, but first, she needed to understand the pattern. Every tactical team had a rhythm, a way of moving and communicating that became predictable if you watched long enough. She had spent 18 minutes on a rooftop in Yemen once, watching a target security detail until she could predict their movements down to the second. She watched now. The guard at the main entrance checked his watch every 90 seconds. The patrolling guard completed a circuit every 4 minutes, disappearing around the back of the building for approximately 45 seconds each cycle. Inside, the hostiles moved with professional efficiency, but she noticed small tells. The one near the west window favored his right leg. The one covering the hostages kept glancing toward the back office where Cray was being held. She built a map in her mind. Positions, patterns, weaknesses. The sound of rotor blades reached her ears, distant but approaching. The helicopter was coming. Through her scope, she saw the Norwegian emerge from the building and look toward the horizon. He said something into his radio. The guards began moving with renewed purpose. Time was running out. She watched the Norwegian give orders. 2 men moved toward a vehicle parked behind the operations center. They emerged moments later, escorting Cray, who walked between them with the hurried steps of a man eager to escape. The hostages were left inside with 4 guards. 4 men who would eliminate 5 witnesses before following their commander to the extraction point. Colette's finger moved to the trigger guard. Not yet. Not quite yet. She slowed her breathing. In through the nose for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Out through the mouth for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. The rhythm of a shooter preparing to enter the space between heartbeats where the body became perfectly still. She thought about Marcus. About the way he used to call wind speed in that calm Georgia drawl. About the jokes he would make to keep her relaxed during long surveillance operations. About the letter he had written her 2 days before he died, the one she had never been able to finish reading. You carry too much, he had written. You think everything is your fault. But some things just are, Colette. Some things are nobody's fault. She had not believed him then. She was not sure she believed him now. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. If she did not take these shots, 5 innocent people would die. And that would be her fault. That weight she would have to carry for the rest of her life. She had carried the weight of 1 child soldier for 3 years. She could not carry 5 more. The crosshairs settled on the guard at the main entrance. 847 meters. For mile per hour crosswind. 41 degrees. Target stationary. Her heartbeat slowed. 62 beats per minute. 60. 58. The space between heartbeats stretched like taffy. In that space, she found a stillness that had made her legendary in a world that did not officially exist. The stillness that had allowed her to make shots that other snipers called impossible. The stillness that she had tried so desperately to bury beneath paperwork and invisibility. The helicopter was getting closer. She could see its lights now on the horizon. The guard checked his watch. Right on schedule. Colette exhaled. Let half the air leave her lungs. Held to rest. Her finger moved from the guard to the trigger. The night held its breath. And Staff Sergeant Colette Odia, the woman nobody noticed, The paper pusher who fetched coffee for arrogant officers, the ghost who had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years, began to pull. Inside the operations center, Private First Class Tomas Delgadillo was trying to control his breathing. His knees ached against the cold floor. His hands were numb for being clasped behind his head for over an hour. The man standing over him with a submachine gun had dead eyes and steady hands, the combination of someone who had killed before and would not hesitate to kill again. Delgadillo thought about his grandmother, about the flight he was supposed to catch in 6 hours, about whether she would ever know what happened to him in this room. Beside him, Master Sergeant Kinney was muttering something under his breath. A prayer, maybe, or a curse. Delgadillo could not tell. One of the armed men near the window spoke into his radio. Extraction vehicle is moving to the landing zone. We need to wrap this up. The guard covering the hostages nodded. He raised his weapon slightly. The gesture was small, but its meaning was clear. Kinney saw it too. He shifted his weight, positioning himself slightly in front of the younger soldiers. "You do not have to do this," Kinney said. "We did not see anything. We do not know anything." The guard looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Everyone knows something, Master Sergeant. That is the problem." Delgadillo closed his eyes. He thought about Staff Sergeant Oduya, the quiet woman who had helped him with his paperwork, the one person on this base who had treated him like he mattered. She was probably hiding somewhere, terrified like everyone else. He hoped she was safe. He hoped someone would tell his grandmother that he had tried to be brave. The guard's finger moved toward the trigger, and then his head snapped back. There was no sound, no warning. One moment the guard was standing over them, and the next he was falling backward with a hole where his left eye had been. The other guards reacted instantly. One dove for cover behind a desk. Another sprinted toward the light switch. The third grabbed Kinney and pulled him upward as a human shield. "What the hell?" someone screamed. "Sniper. We have a sniper." Through the window, 800 meters away, the muzzle flash had already faded into the darkness of the Huachuca Mountains. But Colette was not watching the chaos. She was already tracking her second target. The guard running for the light switch never reached it. The round took him in the center of his back, dropping him 3 feet from the panel. The light stayed on. Inside, panic was spreading. The remaining guards were screaming into their radios, trying to coordinate a response to a threat they could not see. "Single shooter," one of them yelled. "Eastern elevation. Get the thermal scope." Colette shifted her position 2 feet to the left, settling behind a different rock formation. The movement was small but critical. Thermal scopes worked by detecting heat signatures against cooler backgrounds. The rock she had been using was still warm from her body heat. The new position would buy her precious seconds. Through her scope, she watched a guard sprint toward a ladder leading to the roof. He was carrying thermal imaging equipment. If he reached the rooftop and got that scope operational, her concealment would be worthless. She tracked his movement. He was fast, covering ground with the efficiency of someone well-trained. She calculated his trajectory, predicted where he would be in 2 seconds, and placed her crosshairs on that empty space. He ran into the bullet. 3 down, 5 to go. The Norwegian's voice crackled over the radio frequency she had been monitoring since she reached her position. She had tuned into their tactical channel during her climb, a skill she had learned from Marcus during a mission in Syria. "All units, we have a shooter in the eastern mountains. Single operator, suppressed rifle. Maintain cover and return fire on my command." Return fire, Colette thought. They did not know where she was. They did not know who she was. They were firing blind into the darkness while she watched them through crystalline optics from nearly a kilometer away. The guard holding Kinney was smart. He kept the Master Sergeant position between himself and the window, denying Colette a clean shot. She could see Kinney's face through the scope. Blood from the cut on his forehead had dried in streaks down his cheek. His jaw was clenched. His eyes were scanning the room, trying to understand what was happening. He had dismissed her as a desk soldier, had looked through her like she was furniture. And now he was a human shield in a firefight he could not comprehend, being saved by a woman he had never bothered to notice. Colette shifted her focus. The guard behind the desk was peeking out, trying to locate her muzzle flash. He exposed himself for less than a second. A second was enough. For down. The Norwegian was screaming orders now. His professional calm had fractured. He had planned for a clean extraction with minimal resistance. He had not planned for a ghost in the mountains, picking his team apart shot by shot. She heard the helicopter getting closer. Through her peripheral vision, she could see its lights descending toward the landing zone north of the base. Cray was out there somewhere with 2 guards, waiting to disappear into the night. She could not let that happen. But first, she had to deal with the men inside. The men who would kill the hostages the moment they realized the extraction was compromised. The guard holding Kinney was edging toward the back exit, dragging his human shield with him. If he made it outside, she would lose her angle. Colette's mind raced through options. She needed Kinney to move. Just a few inches. Just enough to create a gap. And then Kinney did something that surprised her. He looked directly out the window toward the mountains, toward her position. He could not possibly see her. The distance was too great, the darkness too complete. But somehow he knew. His lips moved. She could not hear the words, but she could read them. Take the shot. Kinney shifted his weight. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A slight lean to the left that created 6 inches of space between his shoulder and the guard's head. 6 inches. At 847 meters, that was a margin of less than a quarter inch on her scope. A breath of wind, a tremor in her hand, a miscalculation of any variable, and she would put a round through the man she was trying to save. Colette did not hesitate. The shot crossed the distance in less than a second. The guard's grip on Kinney went slack. He crumpled to the floor without a sound. 5 down. Kinney stood frozen for a moment. Blood that was not his splattered across his uniform. Then training took over. He grabbed the fallen guard's weapon and dove behind the nearest cover. Delgadillo and the other hostages scrambled across the floor, seeking protection behind desks and filing cabinets. The remaining guards inside were in full retreat now, abandoning their positions and moving toward the back exit. Colette tracked them through her scope. One was using a hostage as cover. The female soldier, a specialist whose name Tag Red Winters. He was dragging her backward toward the door, his weapon pressed against her temple. The other guard had abandoned any pretense of control. He was sprinting for the exit, focused only on escape. She took a mid-stride. The round caught him in the side, spinning him into the doorframe. He collapsed in a heap. 6 down. The guard with Specialist Winters reached the back door. He kicked it open and pulled her outside into the darkness. Colette lost her angle as they disappeared behind the building. She was already moving, grabbing her rifle and repositioning 20 meters to her right, scrambling across loose rock with controlled urgency. The new position gave her a view of the back of the operations center and the parking area beyond. She found them. The guard was moving toward a vehicle, still using Winters as a shield. His head was on a swivel, searching the mountains for the muzzle flash that had killed 6 of his teammates. Colette steadied her breathing. The new distance was shorter, 712 meters. But the angle was worse, and the guard was smart. He kept Winters' position perfectly, denying any clean shot. She watched, waited, counted his steps. He reached the vehicle and fumbled for the door handle. For 1 second, his attention shifted. His grip on Winters loosened as he pulled the door open. Winters felt it. Without hesitation, she drove her elbow backward into his ribs and dropped to the ground. The guard's head was exposed for less than a heartbeat. Colette fired. 7 down. Winters lay on the ground, breathing hard, staring at the body of the man who had been about to kill her. She looked toward the mountains with wide eyes. She could not see Colette, but she raised a trembling hand in what might have been a wave or a salute. 1 hostile remaining. The Norwegian, Victor. Colette scanned the base. The helicopter had landed near the northern perimeter. Its rotors were still spinning, waiting for passengers who would never arrive. She spotted movement near the landing zone. 2 figures. One was Cray, stumbling forward with desperate urgency. The other was Victor, dragging the traitor toward the aircraft. Victor was using Cray as a shield now. He had learned from watching his team die. He knew there was a sniper in the mountains, and he knew that sniper was extraordinary. He was not going to give her an easy shot. Colette calculated the distance. 923 meters. the longest shot she had attempted in 3 years. The wind had shifted, coming from the northwest now at approximately 6 miles per hour. The helicopter's rotors were creating additional turbulence near the landing zone. She adjusted her scope. Click, click, click. Victor was moving fast, covering ground with professional efficiency. In 30 seconds, he would reach the helicopter. In 45 seconds, he would be airborne. In 60 seconds, he would be gone, taking Cray and any hope of justice with him. Colette tracked his movement, studied his pattern. He was good. He never stopped moving, never gave her a stationary target. Every few steps, he would shift Cray to a different position, changing the angle and forcing her to recalculate. But she had been watching him for over an hour now. She knew his rhythm. She knew his tells. And she knew that every fourth step, he shifted his weight to his right foot in a way that pulled him slightly away from Cray for a fraction of a second. She counted his steps. 1, 2, 3. On 4, she fired. The round traveled for 1.2 seconds. In that eternity, Victor took another step. The wind gusted. The helicopter's rotors shifted the air pattern, and Victor's head jerked sideways. He fell. 8 down. Cray stood alone in the darkness, frozen with terror. The helicopter pilot, seeing his entire extraction team eliminated, made a decision. The aircraft lifted off, abandoning the traitor to whatever fate awaited him. Colette watched through her scope as Cray dropped to his knees. His hands were raised. His mouth was moving, probably begging for mercy from Shooter he could not see. She could take the shot. One more round, and the man who had sold secrets, who had endangered his country, who had caused all of his death, would be gone. Her finger rested on the trigger. She thought about Marcus, about the child soldier, about all the shots she had taken and all the weight she carried. Cray was not a threat. He was a coward and a traitor, but he was not pointing a weapon at anyone. He was not about to kill innocent people. She lifted her finger from the trigger. Justice would come for Chief Warrant Officer Desmond Cray. But it would not come from a rifle. Not tonight. She checked her watch. 0331. 12 minutes. 8 shots. 8 targets. The operations center was silent. The hostages were alive. The threat was neutralized. Staff Sergeant Colette Odia lowered her rifle and began the long walk down from the mountain. The silence after the last shot was deafening. Inside the operations center, 5 soldiers lay on the floor behind overturned desks and filing cabinets, waiting for the next round to come. When it did not, they remained frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. Master Sergeant Kinney was the first to rise. He still held the weapon he had taken from the fallen guard, his knuckles white against the grip. Blood streaked his face. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Sound off. Who is hurt?" One by one, the hostages responded. Delgadillo, Specialist Winters, who had crawled back inside through the rear entrance. 2 other soldiers whose names were Patterson and Reeves. All alive, all uninjured except for scrapes and bruises. Kinney moved to the window, scanning the darkness outside. The bodies of the attackers lay where they had fallen. No movement, no threat. "What the hell just happened?" Delgadillo whispered. Kinney shook his head slowly. "I do not know. Sniper. Single shooter from the mountains. Took out 8 hostiles in." He checked his watch. 12 minutes. "That is impossible," Patterson said. 8 targets at that distance. In the dark. While they were moving and shooting back. No one could do that. Someone did. Kinney stared at the mountains. The Huachuca Range was a black wall against the star-filled sky, revealing nothing. Whoever had saved them was still out there. Watching. Waiting. He thought about the moment when he had looked toward the window, when he had somehow known that someone was out there, that someone was going to help them. He had mouthed the word without understanding why. Take the shot. And the shot had come. Through a 6-inch gap. At nearly a kilometer. In the dead of night. "Who are you?" he murmured. Outside, the base was beginning to stir. The gunfire had stopped, but the chaos was just beginning. Military police officers who had survived the initial assault were emerging from defensive positions. Medics were rushing toward the wounded. Voices shouted orders and called for status reports. Near the northern perimeter, Cray remained on his knees with his hands raised. Two MPs approached him with weapons drawn, uncertain whether he was a victim or a threat. "I am Chief Warrant Officer Desmond Cray," he was saying. "I am a hostage. I was being extracted against my will. The shooter, the sniper, they almost killed me too." The MPs exchanged glances. Something in Cray's voice did not sound right. Something in his posture suggested a man who was lying rather than a man who was relieved to be alive. "Secure him," one of them said. "We will sort it out later." Cray's protests faded as they led him toward the security station. In the motor pool basement, Sergeant First Class Amara Ibekwe heard the silence and knew it was over. She had been listening to the gunfire, counting the shots, trying to understand what was happening above her. The three young soldiers huddled beside her were crying with relief. "It stopped," one of them said. "Does that mean we are safe?" Amara did not answer. She was thinking about Colette, about the way her friend had moved through the darkness with impossible confidence, about the questions she had been afraid to ask for 2 years. "Stay here," she told the soldiers. "I need to find someone." She limped toward the basement door, ignoring the pain in her leg. On the mountain, Colette was descending. The rifle was slung across her back. The ghillie suit was heavy with sweat and dust. Her muscles ached from the tension of the past hour. But her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. She had done what needed to be done. She had saved them. Now came the part she dreaded. The sun would rise in less than 3 hours. By then, investigators would be swarming the base. They would find shell casings on the mountain. They would calculate trajectories and distances. They would realize that the shots had come from a single position, fired by a single shooter with extraordinary skill. They would start asking questions, and eventually, they would find her. She could run, disappear into the desert before dawn, make her way to Mexico, assume a new identity. She had done it before in other countries, vanishing like smoke when missions went wrong. She knew how to become invisible in ways that most people could not imagine. But running meant leaving everything behind. The life she had built, the people she had come to care about. Amara, Delgadillo, even Kenny, the man who had never bothered to notice her. She stopped walking, looked up at the stars. For 3 years, she had been running. Running from Mogadishu, running from Marcus, running from the thing she was. She had buried herself in paperwork and invisibility, pretending that the sniper in her blood no longer existed. Tonight had proven that was a lie. She was still what she had always been. The only question was whether she could accept it. Colette took a deep breath, let out slowly, made a decision. She continued down the mountain, not toward the perimeter fence and escape, toward the base, toward the chaos, toward the questions she would have to answer. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten when she reached the edge of the installation. MPs were everywhere, establishing a perimeter, securing the scene. None of them were looking toward the mountains. None of them expected the shooter to walk calmly into their midst. She adjusted the rifle on her back, straightened her ghillie suit, and stepped out of the shadows into the light. The first person to see her was a young MP with wide eyes and a weapon that immediately pointed at her chest. "Freeze! Drop the weapon. Hands where I can see them." Colette stopped. Slowly, deliberately, she unslung the rifle from her back and set on the ground. Then she raised her hands and stood perfectly still. "I am Staff Sergeant Colette Oduya," she said. "G2 Intelligence Section. I'm a shooter." The MP stared at her. His weapon did not waver, but his face betrayed his confusion. He had been expecting a commando, a special operator, a man with a beard and tactical gear and the hardened look of someone who killed for a living. Instead, he was looking at a woman in a ghillie suit who spoke with calm precision and stood as still as a statue. "Say again." "I'm the one who engaged the hostiles. 8 targets neutralized. The hostages in the operations center are secure. Chief Warrant Officer Cray is a traitor and should be held for questioning. Now, please lower your weapon. I'm not a threat." Other MPs were converging on her position, weapons drawn, voices overlapping with confusion and commands. Someone was calling for backup. Someone else was calling for the officer in charge. Colette remained motionless. She had expected this. The chaos, the disbelief, the weapons pointed at her chest. She had learned a long time ago that the moments after a mission were often more dangerous than the mission itself. A senior MP pushed through the crowd. Master Sergeant Chevrons on his collar. Gray hair. Hard eyes. He looked at Colette, then at the rifle on the ground, then back at Colette. "You're telling me that you, a staff sergeant from the admin section, just eliminated 8 armed hostiles from mountains?" "Yes." "By yourself?" "Yes." "With a sniper rifle?" "Yes." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to his subordinates. "Secure the weapon. Escort her to the command post. And somebody give me a supervisor who can explain what the hell is going on." They walked her across the base as dawn broke over the Huachuca Mountains. Soldiers lined the route, staring at the woman in the ghillie suit who had appeared from nowhere. Whispers followed her like a shadow. "Is that the shooter? That is Staff Sergeant Oduya. She works in G2. The paper pusher. No way. No way that is her." Colette kept her eyes forward. She had spent 3 years being invisible. Now every eye on the base was fixed on her. The transition was jarring, but she kept her composure. One foot in front of the other. Steady breathing. The same discipline that had allowed her to wait for hours in a sniper hide. Motionless and silent. They reached the command post as the first helicopter arrived. Not the extraction helicopter that had fled into the night, but a Black Hawk bearing the markings of a rapid response team from Fort Bliss. More would follow. By noon, the base would be swarming with investigators, intelligence officers, and high-ranking officials demanding answers. Inside the command post, Colette was placed in a chair and surrounded by MPs. Someone brought her water. Someone else asked if she was injured. She answered their questions with minimal words, conserving her energy for the interrogation she knew was coming. The door opened. Master Sergeant Kenny walked in. He looked different than he had an hour ago. The blood had been cleaned from his face, but the weight of what had happened was carved into every line of his expression. He stopped a few feet from her chair and stared. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kenny said, "It was you." "Yes, the whole time. You were right there. In the section, filing papers, fetching coffee." "Yes." "And you never said anything." Colette met his eyes. There was nothing to say. Kenny shook his head slowly. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I walked past you every day. Treated you like you were nobody. Like you were furniture. And then you." He stopped. Swallowed. "Tried again. You saved my life. You saved all of us. With shots I would not have believed possible if I had not seen the bodies myself." Colette said nothing. Kenny took a step closer. "Who are you?" "Staff Sergeant Oduya." "Really?" Before she could answer, the door opened again. Sergeant First Class Amara Ibekwe limped in, her leg freshly bandaged, her detective eyes scanning the room until they found Colette. Their gazes met. "I knew it," Amara said softly. "From the first day I met you, I knew there was something. The way you moved, the way you noticed things. I just never imagined." She crossed the room and sat down beside Colette. Took her hand. "You do not have to explain anything to them," Amara said. "Not until you are ready." Colette looked at her friend, the only person on this base who had ever really seen her, the only person she had ever allowed close. "I am ready," Colette said. "I have been hiding for 3 years. I think it is time to stop." The door opened a third time. Private First Class Tomas Delgadillo stood in the entrance, his young face a mixture of awe and something that looked almost like joy. "Staff Sergeant Oduya," he said. I told them you would come." Colette felt something shift in her chest, a warmth she had not expected. "You should have stayed quiet, Private." Delgadillo shook his head. "No, I should not have, because I was right." He crossed the room and stood at attention in front of her. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." Colette looked at him, at Amara, at Kenny, at the MPs who were still watching her with disbelief. For the first time in 3 years, she was not invisible. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like something other than a curse. The interrogation lasted 6 hours. They brought in specialists from Fort Bliss, intelligence officers with hard eyes and harder questions. They wanted to know everything. Her training, her deployments, the missions that did not exist on any official record. The shots she had made in countries the United States was never supposed to be operating in. Colette answered what she could. Some questions she deflected with the simple phrase, that is classified above your clearance level. The interrogators did not like that answer, but they accepted it. They had made calls, checked databases, discovered that Staff Sergeant Colette Odia's Real file was buried so deep that only a handful of people in Washington had access to it. By noon, those people were on their way to Fort Huachuca. While Colette sat in the interrogation room, the base transformed around her. Crime scene investigators mapped the positions of the fallen hostiles. Ballistics experts recovered her shell casings from the mountain and calculated trajectories that made them shake their heads in disbelief. Medical examiners documented cause of death for 8 men who had been killed by a shooter they never saw. Chief Warrant Officer Desmond Cray was in a separate room, spinning lies that unraveled faster than he could tell them. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Amara's access logs, communications recovered from the dead extraction team, financial records that showed payments from shell companies linked to hostile foreign intelligence services. By evening, Cray had stopped talking entirely and was demanding a lawyer. Colette did not care about Cray. She cared about the 5 soldiers she had saved. She cared about Amara, who had refused to leave the command post despite her injury. She cared about Delgadillo, who had caught a flight to El Paso that afternoon to see his grandmother. He had stopped by before he left, stood in the doorway of the interrogation room with his bag over his shoulder and tears in his eyes. "I have to go," he said, "but I wanted to tell you. Go see your grandmother, private. That is an order." He smiled through the tears. "Yes, Staff Sergeant." Then he was gone. The sun was setting when Colonel Henrietta Vance arrived. She had been at a conference in Washington when the attack occurred and had commandeered a military jet to return as soon as she received the news. She walked into the command post with the bearing of someone who expected answers and would not leave until she had them. The interrogators briefed her, showed her the evidence, explained what Colette had done. Vance listened in silence. When they finished, she dismissed them and asked to speak with Staff Sergeant Odia alone. The room emptied. The door closed. Vance sat down across from Colette and studied her for a long moment. "I have been read into your file," Vance said finally. "The real one, not the cover story we have been using for 3 years." Colette nodded. "You were one of the most decorated snipers in a program that officially does not exist. 17 confirmed missions. 0 failures. You were considered a national asset until you requested transfer out after an incident in Mogadishu." "Yes, Colonel. The incident involved a child soldier. You were forced to make a choice between his life and your spotter's life." "Yes. Your spotter died 2 weeks later." "Suicide." Colette's jaw tightened. "Yes." Vance leaned back in her chair. "And you have spent the past 3 years filing paperwork in my intelligence section, hiding from what you are." "I was not hiding, Colonel. I was surviving." The words hung in the air between them. Vance nodded slowly. "I understand survival, Staff Sergeant. I have been in this uniform for 28 years. I have seen soldiers break under far less weight than you carry." She stood and walked to the window. The Huachuca Mountains were silhouettes against the fading sky. "What you did last night was extraordinary," Vance continued. 8 targets in 12 minutes from a range that my best marksman would call impossible. You saved 5 lives. You exposed a traitor. You eliminated a hostile extraction team without a single friendly casualty. Colette said nothing. Vance turned back to face her. "The Army is going to want to give you a medal. Probably the Distinguished Service Cross. There will be press. Attention. Everything you have been avoiding. I do not want a medal." "I know." Vance returned to her seat. "But here's what I'm offering instead. There is a training program at Fort Benning. Advanced sniper instruction for the next generation of long-range specialists. They need instructors who have done the impossible, who can teach others to do it too." Colette looked up. "You want me to train snipers? I want you to stop hiding." Vance's voice softened. "You have been punishing yourself for 3 years, Oduya. Burying yourself in administrative work like it could erase what happened in Mogadishu. But tonight proved that you cannot erase what you are. You can only choose what to do with it." Colette thought about Marcus, about the letter he had written, about the words she had never been able to finish reading. "You carry too much. You think everything is your fault. But some things just are. Maybe it was time to stop carrying the weight alone. Maybe it was time to teach others how to carry it too." I will think about it, Colette said. That is all I ask. Vance stood and moved toward the door. Then she paused. For what it is worth, Staff Sergeant, I am glad you were hiding on my base. Otherwise, a lot of good soldiers would be dead right now. She left. Colette sat alone in the empty room, watching the last light fade from the mountains where she had made 8 impossible shots. For the first time in 3 years, she did not feel invisible. And for the first time in 3 years, she was not sure she wanted to be. 1 week later, the sun rose over Fort Huachuca the same way it always had. Golden light spilling across the desert. Shadows retreating from the Huachuca Mountains. Another day, beginning in a place where most days were unremarkable. But nothing about this week had been unremarkable. The investigation had concluded. 8 hostiles confirmed killed. 1 traitor in federal custody awaiting trial on espionage charges. 5 soldiers alive who would have been dead without intervention. The official report ran 47 pages and used words like unprecedented and extraordinary and impossible with unusual frequency. Colette had read every page. Then she had filed it away and started packing. Her quarters looked the same as they had the day she arrived 3 years ago. Sparse, impersonal, nothing on the walls. Nothing that suggested a human being had lived here rather than simply existed. The case sat open on her bed. The rifle inside, cleaned and oiled. The ghillie suit folded beside it. She had not decided yet whether she would take them with her. A knock at the door. Colette opened it to find Amara standing in the hallway, leaning on a cane. Her leg was healing well, the doctors said. She would walk without assistance within a month. You were going to leave without saying goodbye, Amara said. It was not a question. I was going to find you before I left. Liar. Colette almost smiled. Almost. Amara limped into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the open case, at the rifle, at the ghillie suit. Then she looked at Colette. So you're taking the training position. I have not decided. Yes, you have. Amara's voice was gentle. You decided the moment Vance offered it. You're just afraid to admit it. Colette sat down beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I do not know how to be that person again, Colette finally said. The person who trains others to kill. The person who made those shots and felt nothing but calm. You felt something, Amara said. I saw your face when you walked out of those mountains. You were not calm. You were carrying every one of those shots like stones in your chest. That is the problem. No. Amara took her hand. That is the solution. You feel the weight. That is what makes you different. That is what will make you a good instructor. You will teach them how to carry it. Colette looked at the rifle, at the scope that had shown her 8 targets in 12 minutes, at the weapon that had taken lives and saved lives in equal measure. Marcus used to say something similar, she said quietly. He said I carried too much, that I thought everything was my fault. Was he right? Colette did not answer. She did not have to. Amara squeezed her hand. Come back and visit. When you're settled at Benning. I expect letters. Phone calls. Do not disappear again. I will try. Do not try. Do. Colette nodded. Then she did something she had not done in 3 years. She leaned over and hugged her friend. They stayed like that for a long moment. 2 women who had survived something terrible together. 2 friends who had found each other in the most unlikely of places. When Amara finally left, Colette finished packing. She closed the case with the rifle inside. She would take it with her. Not because she wanted to use it again, but because it was part of who she was. Pretending otherwise had never worked. She was carrying her bags toward the motor pool when she saw him. Private First Class Tomas Delgadillo was walking toward her across the quad. He looked different than he had a week ago. Older somehow. More settled. His grandmother had passed 2 days after he arrived in El Paso. He had been holding her hand when she went. Staff Sergeant, he said, stopping in front of her. I heard you were leaving today. Word travels fast. It is a small base. He shifted his weight. Nervous. I wanted to tell you something before you go. Colette waited. I put in a request, Delgadillo said. For sniper training. They said I have aptitude. Good eyes. Steady hands. They are sending me to a qualification course next month. Colette studied him. 19 years old. Eager. Determined. The same age she had been when she first picked up a rifle and discovered she could do things other people could not. It is not what you think it is, she said. The life. The work. It changes you. I know. You showed me that. What did I show you? Delgadillo met her eyes. That the best ones carry the weight. And they use it anyway. They use it to save people. Colette felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she had been carrying for 3 years, finally beginning to unravel. If you ever need someone to talk to, she said, someone who understands what it costs, you find me. Wherever I am. I will, Staff Sergeant. Wherever you are. He saluted. She returned it. Then she walked toward the waiting vehicle that would take her to the airfield. The mountains rose behind her, golden in the morning light. Somewhere up there was the outcropping where she had made 8 impossible shots. Somewhere up there was the place where Staff Sergeant Colette Odia had stopped hiding and started living again. She did not look back. She did not need to. The past would always be there, waiting in the quiet moments. The child soldier. Marcus. The weight of every trigger pull. But the future was ahead of her now. A new mission. A new purpose. A chance to teach others how to carry what she carried. She climbed into the vehicle. The driver asked if she was ready. Colette looked out the window at Fort Huachuca one last time. At the base where she had been invisible for 3 years. At the place where she had finally been seen. Yes, she said. I am ready. The vehicle pulled away. The desert stretched out before her. Vast and open and full of possibility. And Staff Sergeant Colette Odia, the woman they never knew was a sniper, drove toward whatever came next. If this story moved you, drop a comment about what resonated most. Was there a moment that changed how you saw Colette? Or share if you have ever witnessed someone reveal hidden strength when it mattered most.